spend time not just with Allie, but also Buffy, Pat, and Robin, who are part of a small segment, if you will, of our larger community of about 2,000 teacher leaders from across the country. These four, with about 24 more teachers from both this state and North Carolina, have been working on, in a virtual way, implementing and testing out new tools for the Common Core. And we're trying to figure out how this thing called the internet, how it could literally blow the doors off classrooms to open up the profession and spread the expertise of our nation's best teachers. Our bet, and we have some evidence, that there's probably at least 20 to 30% extraordinary teachers like Buffy, Pat, Robin, Allie, and several other great teachers in this room here. But what this country has never done, have figured out how to systematically utilize them. So I'd like to kind of jump into some of the knotty issues of the teaching profession. Believe it or not, in the next 28 minutes, with maybe about 20 slides, with both images, some complicated statistics, and some bold ideas, and even a 4-minute video, Stu, that captures the big ideas from the book 2030. Would like to kind of set a context for grappling with this issue here in Kentucky and nationwide. I do want to remind us of one fact as I listen to all of you. Fabulous introductions, great expertise, great diversity, fabulous groups too. But every one of you mentioned a teacher really connected to you, right? Or you were a teacher yourself. Remember that 1 in 100 Americans is a public school teacher. It is the nation's largest college-educated workforce. With that comes a lot of potential, but also enormous challenges. It is a big behemoth, if you will, that's very difficult to change. And a lot of it's rooted in our history, culture, and politics. And I want to get into some of that. And I also want to get into a perspective that I hope will take you global. I don't have to make the pitch to anyone in this room how the economy has changed so dramatically, and across the world there is an urbanization of almost every place. 80% of all people living in North America now live in an urban center. And with urban centers come diversity, highly mobile individuals, comes all kinds of challenges that are spreading throughout our public school system, even what we now call rural communities. And so we need to look very carefully at what some of the top performing nations and cities are doing when we think about how we want to address this issue of teachers and teaching and teacher effectiveness. But before I kind of jump into a few slides, I want to ask all of you just a question, get a little participation right from the get-go. And Chris, just do a little note, see what, we'll do a little poll here. I'm going to ask you to answer a question from two different lenses. The first lens is from the United States as a whole, and the second lens is from Kentucky. So from sitting as a U.S. citizen, as you think across our great nation, I want you to raise your hand if you think teachers are an investment or an expense across the United States. So who thinks that teachers are an investment? Okay. Who thinks they are treated as an expense? You're right, I did not ask the first question. Now do what you want to know. Okay, thank you very much, Mary Ann. Okay, how are teachers treated in this country right now? Investment or expense? Investment. Expense. Okay, wow, unanimous. From Kentucky's perspective, right now in your state, the Commonwealth, how many teachers are treated as are teachers treated as an investment or expense? Let me ask this correctly one more time. Or trying to investment, expense. Chris and I and another teacher in our network, Laurie Mazzarino, a fabulous teacher of about 25 years who created her own teacher-led school inside Denver. And another colleague of ours, Ann Bird, spent a full day with 4 Singaporean educators. We were in Orlando. We met them in Orlando. We didn't have to fly to Singapore, which was great because it's a short flight. The reason we met in Orlando, and Singapore, as you may know, is one of the top performing nations in the world. A nation that is small, but it's about the same size as Kentucky. It's about the same number of people. Far more diverse than Kentucky, by the way. But anyway, we met with them in Orlando. You know why we met with them in Orlando? And they have a very sophisticated teacher development system, an extremely sophisticated teacher evaluation system. And we actually have a framework in your packets that describe a bit about what that framework looked like. But we met with them in Orlando. Do you know why? Anybody? Yes, they were in Orlando because everything they do, they say, they learn from us here in America. They were at a conference. They say we just don't implement very well. They do. In fact, they say that we well beyond implementation. You know what they do in Singapore? They execute with veracity and fidelity. I was telling Becky, and I'll get into this a little bit later, the average teacher in Singapore, and we did this last time we were together, Allie, but the average teacher in Singapore teaches 19 hours a week. They work the same amount of hours as the average American teacher, which, by the way, today is about 53 hours a week. Given work teachers do at home and on weekends and so forth. They work the same amount of hours. But they own the average teacher, Allie, in front of kids on a weekly basis.
About 30, 32.
Yeah. Yeah. I was here, last time I was here, when I had dinner with Stu and Cindy, I spoke at a small conference on the campus of UK, international conference, and there were some Finnish educators in the room at this international conference. And when Allie said that, you know what the Finnish educator did? How can you implement the kinds of reforms that you want to implement when all you're doing is in front of kids and you have no time to think, analyze data, work together, work with parents, build community liaisons with all those various organizations and so forth. Literally, that's what the Finnish educator did. So I want us to think about these big and bold issues as we kind of go through, believe it or not, in the next 18 minutes, Chris. It's going to be a real test to see if I can walk us through a few of these images, some complicated statistics related to teacher evaluation, and a few bold ideas. I got 5 ideas. I'm not saying they're the silver bullets, but at the end of the presentation, I got 5 ideas I'd love you to think about, to consider as you deliberate over transforming the system of teacher development. Because the only way you're going to get at teaching effectiveness is transform the system of teacher development. It's not going to be 1 tool, 2 tools, 3 tools, or a single strategy. It's got to be a more comprehensive effort. So the first thing I want to do is just show you this and remind you something. This is an amalgamation of some of the best research that's been assembled in about 20 years in this country around the effects of teachers on student achievement. Yes, yes, yes. Teachers are the largest influence, in-school influence, on whether or not a kid learns. This is an amalgamation of about 30 different studies. But I want you to look carefully at it. Teachers still only amount to 8.5% of the variance. There is another set of variables that inside the school that account for whether or not a teacher is effective or not. And then there's the lion's share outside the school. That does not mean we don't focus on teachers And teaching, absolutely, it's a good strategy. It's probably the most powerful strategy we can take, because we can control a lot about who teaches and under what conditions. Okay? However, when you think about this, I want you also to consider a few more things. And that is the larger perspective, this historical perspective that undergirds almost everything we do in this country. I want to remind us that here in this country, and you might want to say the teaching profession kind of began to grow up in 1848 when the first formal teacher education school was created. But let me tell you, for the most of our history, and that's what now, 164 years, is my math correct? Is that right? Alan, you're the math person. I think so. Okay. We have actually, in times of shortages, have tended to opt for the cheap teacher, the inexpensive teacher, I should say. In times of need to create better prepared teachers, we've had a higher education system, historically, that have treated ed schools as cash cows. Has anybody ever heard that expression? Yeah. That means basically, and this is actually the latest stat that I've seen, it was a few years back, that for every dollar that an ed school dean brings in tuition, he or she gets to usually spend 50 cents on that dollar on the ed school students. And most of the ed school dollars do not go to the teacher ed students, they go to other parts of the ed school that have more prestige. No wonder we don't have a system of teacher education that we see in Finland and Singapore. Well, let me just start to move through the history a little bit to take you to a few images about what we as a society and how we portray teachers. And these are kind of fun in some ways, and some of you may not even, Stu, you may be old enough to remember Miss Dove. 1955, Jennifer Jones played in the movie. The classic image of teacher as matronly, who worked for the community, was a nurturer, a strong disciplinarian, but was never expected to question or lead. That's a still prominent issue that we have in our heads, and it's part of our history and how we've cultivated the teaching profession that we have today with this image. We also have this image. Does anybody remember Ferris Bueller? So I won't spend a lot of time on this, but just if you haven't seen this movie since 1984, oops. Okay, music coming on now. It's either Al Green or Ferris Bueller. How that happened. Actually, it's pretty good. Maybe listen more Al Green, but let me just do this just quickly. So this is in this image is okay. Let's get the full screen. There we go. If you haven't, this image still prevails in many ways.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the anyone, Great Depression, passed the the tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which anyone raised or lowered, raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government.
This goes on. This goes on a bit, but that is an image that's still in our head. And probably there are some teachers of that 3.2 million who, quite frankly, still teach that way. I remember when I taught, there was a history teacher down the hall from me who pretty much taught that way. But then we have other images beyond Ben Stein as kind of the pedantic, boring lecturer, right? Which is not befitting of all of teaching and learning today, right? We have these three images that are very powerful in our minds. These are the superhero teachers who work 80 hours a week and more, or Hilary Swank playing Erin Runwell in Freedom Writers, or Robin Williams playing John Keating, I believe, in Dead Poets Society, of course, and then this Jaime Escalante played by Edward Alamos. These teachers, by the way, well, Alamos died of a heart attack. I know Bruel lost her marriage. And of course, Keating was really more of a fictional character in Dead Poets Society. But these images also prevail, that our systems will be fixed by these extraordinary charismatic teachers who work these enormous hours. And then we have this horrible image. The most recent movie has come out, Cameron Diaz playing bad teacher. In fact, I remember when this movie came out about a year ago, I was in Los Angeles, and I was in traffic, and I was about this far from getting to a very serious accident. I saw this billboard. I didn't know this movie was out, and I saw this horrific image. I'm in the city actually giving a talk around the future of teaching. It's a great movie. And I saw this image in the background. I don't know if anybody's seen the movie. I will not see it, but I do hear it. It's just the absolutely horrific sort of set of circumstances that this woman, the teacher, plays in this film that gives teaching such a bad name, and actually, I think, undermines our efforts to invest in teachers and teaching in a way that I know all of them want to. So let me just kind of put out to you, because of these images, and because of some, I think, policies that have built, and many well-intended policies, we have pretty much kind of begun to think of teachers as needing to be fixed, okay? And because our image of teachers needing to be fixed, we end up having policies that we got to put money into teachers to make sure they enter into teaching, or that those who come from teacher ed programs are not valued, so we put more incentives into those to come into teaching with less pedagogical preparation. So right now in New York City, 1 out of 3 teachers who enters the system, it's a big system, right, of 80,000 teachers, 1 out of 3 entering that system today comes in with less than 5 weeks of training. 5 weeks or less of training before they enter the profession. We think we have to pay bonuses to get teachers to move to high-need schools. We do very little about the working conditions in those schools. And we focus teacher evaluation primarily on new methods, statistical methods, which have a lot of promise. But they also, by the way, as I'll show you, have a great deal of instability and bias. So this is actually a tip. Y'all heard of value-added modeling? I know Corey knows it like the back of her hand. But it's something that's been around now for about, quite frankly, well, for your Tennessee folks, it really was created by a guy named Bill Sanders in the mid-90s, and became popular when he wrote an article in 1996 using this statistical method, by the way, built upon, he was an agronomist, so it's built upon models that were used in agriculture to figure out basically how seeds spread. So he was trying to think about that same model to figure out how individual teachers contribute to the effectiveness of their students, controlling for variables or not. And there's lots of different models out there, but let me tell you, and while they are an important way to start thinking objectively about whether or not teachers are good or not so good, what we know is that they actually include, we look at the researchers who look at this model more carefully, that it's not ready for prime time to be used as a sole determinant, or some cases maybe not even a partial determinant. Let me tell you why. Because for the most part, the models, depending on which one you use, and there's probably a dozen that are out there. So Tennessee may use something different than Kentucky. Massachusetts may use something different than Florida. Depending on which model that you use, Allie may be a very effective teacher or a very ineffective teacher. So which model do you use? Also, there's a lot of variation in these models because of the tests themselves. Some tests are better scaled than others. I don't want to get too technical here. But some tests, I mean, Allie, you teach high school math and is calculus you teach, and what else? Algebra 2. So even if you wanted to try to judge Allie's calculus teaching on the basis of what a kid did earlier in algebra and calculus are closer than, say, geometry and algebra, right? So think about how different a test might be depending on the content that's being used, or being tested, I should say, and how, because the tests are not connected to each other, using a value-added statistic with a test that's not very well connected is going to give you a very biased response. This is why, actually, and I'm going to quickly flip to this slide because I know we've got to get to some Q&A in just a few moments. But look at this slide here, and I know it's a little difficult to read, but basically it's looking at, from the state of Florida, using their value-added system, that if you kind of think about teachers being graded from A to F, kind of letter grades that we are very familiar with in education, right? 20% or more of teachers in year 1 who got an A, because of the lack of stability and bias in the value-added stat, 20% or more are going to be in the F category next year. So what this, and Corey and I were just talking about this doesn't mean that you jettison the use of some statistics like this, but you cannot use it in a rigid and very narrow way, which, by the way, is what is happening all across the country right now. There's no such thing as value-added assessment of teachers in Singapore or Finland. When teachers are asked, which is this is a fun little graph here. This is just teachers from across the country. This is a survey that was just released just a few months ago, sponsored by the Gates Foundation, and undertaken by Scholastic. And they asked us, I think it's a big sample of teachers, 40,000 across the country, to answer the survey. When teachers were asked, what measures would they like to be judged on? Okay? The numbers are pretty good. Interesting. Oh, excuse me, this slide. Jumped ahead a little here. When asked about the standardized tests at the state level, forgive me, I hit the wrong slide here. Teachers were asked, how consistent are the tests? Do they give me good information? How aligned are they with the curriculum? How accurate are they? How useful are they to me? How useful are they to parents? And how useful they are to schools? Now, what I have up here on this slide, forgive me for missing the wrong topic here early on, but what I have here on this slide is the percentage of teachers who strongly agreed with each number of those issues. And what you see across the board when it comes to the traditional once-a-year administered standardized tests that many states are using to create these value-added estimates for teachers, what you find is no more than 20% of the teachers think they are, quite frankly, helpful. And this is the slide I thought I was going to start with. When asked, which measures do you want to be measured by? Which tools? The vast majority, which is compared to, would like to be measured by some measure of student growth. But very few want to be measured by standardized tests. They are not so sanguine about student surveys, which is picking up steam, because I think teachers question the reliability of those. And of course, I think they might vary by age of the student too, in terms of their quality and usefulness. Class assignments, peer observations, principal observations, and assessment of the teacher's content knowledge all have kind of modest levels of support from teachers themselves. Teachers want to be examined on the basis of how well kids learn. They just want it to be done in a way that makes sense and can be useful. That said, I mentioned earlier about the conditions of teachers' work, and it really is not necessarily those issues that generally get talked about. With all due respect to my friend Mary Ann over here, when unions and administrators go head and toe a bit sometimes when it comes to contract time. But here are the conditions that research has revealed over time that make the most difference in whether or not a teacher is effective with the children that he or she is teaching. Number one, teachers say, and researchers have confirmed, that when teachers work the same kids over time, more in 1 year, they are more effective. Makes sense too, right? They know the child. They know the parent. They teach the same content, especially in secondary schools, for more than 1 year. There's some researchers out there that say teaching experience doesn't matter. And yes, some researchers will show you that, but guess what those researchers have not done? They have not controlled for what teachers taught over those years, from years 1 through 20. So guess what? When teachers teach the same courses in the same grades for long periods of time, teaching experience matters for student achievement up to 20 years. So you pick up most research summaries today, and they'll say consistently, teaching experience doesn't matter. That's why we don't need to have experienced teachers. Those researchers are not controlling for some of the most important variables like this one. They got to have high quality curriculum materials, and not all teachers have that. And then finally, this is what I referred to earlier when I was speaking about Singapore. They have to have time to really not just sit around and talk about kids, but systematically look at student data and evidence and have time and space and resources to use that evidence to change their practice. So I think you know, as I've mentioned earlier, that there's been a lot of talk about what top-performing nations have done, are doing, will continue to do in the international world of education. This thing called the PISA results have picked up a lot of steam of late. It's an international assessment. It's given every couple of years. There are about 45 nations that participate. We are one of them. Kids get these assessments. They have pretty sophisticated methodology and research goes in behind the analysis of the data. These are from the 2009 PISA results in reading, math, and science. You can see where the United States falls relative to some of these top-performing nations. There's a lot been written about these results and interpreted. In the last couple of years, there's been an international summit on the teaching profession, where many of these nations are coming together, and the ministers and the union heads from each of those countries are beginning to talk about these things in a more collaborative way. I will say one thing, it's been an honor for me to observe those proceedings the last 2 years. And when I walked into in the first year in 2011, I walked into this big banquet hall in New York City where the convening was taking place. And I went out to get a cup of coffee. I walked back in, and I heard someone from Finland speaking, okay? And I swear to goodness, Mary Ann, I thought this woman was the head of the union, the way she was talking about the conditions of teachers' work. Guess who she was? She was the Minister of Education. And you just don't see that here in this country. The good news, guess what? You see that more in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Compared to, Corey and I were just talking about this. There's more collaboration to build upon between administrators and teachers here than in most places around the country. But anyway, this work is picking up a lot of steam. In fact, I'm pleased to say I'm getting ready to go on a trip to Finland with some of the nation's top policy leaders in a couple of weeks, including George Miller and Tom Harkin, who have prominent roles on education committees in both the Senate and as well as in the House. We think that there is and Corey and I were just talking about too, it's time for this country, and particularly a state like Kentucky, to begin to learn and utilize lessons from these top-performing nations. So what do? In these top-performing nations? Quite simply, they first of all invest heavily in teacher education. If you are well qualified, you've got to be well qualified. They go after top students. But guess what? I know this sounds like an expense, not an investment, my dear friends. But no one in Finland and Singapore, if they get into teacher ed school, pays for it. And it is a very intense experience. At least 1 year of training inside of schools before you become a teacher of record. In model schools, you learn under the tutelage of great teachers like the ones here in this room. You don't learn under the tutelage of a faculty member, a higher faculty member, who hasn't taught in the school. They have a role, but they're not the ones who are leading the preparation of these future teachers. Every beginning teacher gets intensive mentoring. Every teacher gets 100 to 300 hours, do the math, 100 to 300 hours of paid professional development a year. We're struggling to hold on to those 24 hours, right? We've actually lost some of those already, right, Miriam? 100 to 300 hours. I was telling, Becky, did I tell you that our Singaporean friends, Chris, you were there in the room when Mike Thurman, the head of the union, told us that 1 in 11 teachers in Singapore in any given year is on a paid sabbatical for 6 months. And how much money do they get, Chris?
$8,000.
$8,000 in travel to go to Shanghai, to go to India, to go to Melbourne, Australia, to learn about more effective teaching practices. 1 in 11. Now it's a rigorous process to get this award, but 1 in 11 teachers in Singapore in a given year is on a paid sabbatical for 6 months. These are the kinds of issues that we looked at when we wrote Teaching 2030. And Chris, how much time do I have?
Less than 5.
Okay, we're good. So let me take 4 minutes and see if the sound will work. And give you some of the big ideas that we talked about in Teaching 2030.
You may have noticed, there's a lot of talk about improving the performance of our teachers and our schools, but it can feel like moving a mountain. How would we even begin? Well, researchers tell us that teachers make a big difference in how much students learn, even in the most challenging schools, and that's important to know. It doesn't mean we ignore the issues of poverty or parenting or the many children who come to school with English as a second language, but recognizing this simple truth, that better teaching helps all students achieve more, gives us a foundation to build a school system worthy of American ideals. Unfortunately, most reformers ignore how challenging teaching in the 21st century really is. To get the job done right, we need millions of well-prepared, highly savvy teachers to teach for a career, not just a job, and to spread their expertise to their colleagues. We have to pay attention to the world's changing landscape so we can empower teachers to reach the educational mountaintop. In the classrooms of today and tomorrow, there are 5 things teachers must know how to do. 1. Teach the Google learner. Nowadays, students can find out everything about anything with a few taps of the finger. 2. Partner with a student body that's increasingly diverse. By 2030, 40% or more students will be second language learners. 3. Prepare kids to compete for jobs in a global marketplace. In our highly connected world, communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creative problem solving are the new basics. 4. Help students monitor their own learning. Digital tools allow students to learn 24/7 and authentically demonstrate what they know. Teachers will deploy sophisticated tools to assess whether students meet academic standards, and they'll fine-tune instruction when they don't.
Allie, your colleagues are doing this right now.
5. Connect teaching to a broader spectrum of community needs. Increasing economic turmoil creates family and societal instability, and it pushes schools to integrate health and social services into academics. Our book, Teaching 2030, outlines the big ideas that will make it possible for teachers to meet 21st century demands. We'll build a leadership force of 600,000 teacherpreneurs, classroom experts who teach students regularly while also serving as teacher educators, policy researchers, community organizers, and trustees of their profession. This will finally blur the lines of distinction between those who teach in schools and those who lead them. Teachers will serve as brokers of learning and experts in defining and measuring student and school success for the public. Teaching will be a well-compensated professional career with differentiated pathways into the classroom. This guarantees that every child has a well-prepared team of educators, led by teachers whose expertise weaves in and out of digital space. There's no time like the present. Policymakers must learn more about the complexities of teaching and invest in teachers in powerful new ways. Teachers' unions need to transform into professional guilds where members meet high performance standards and the skills of teacherpreneurs extend locally and globally. We invite you to join us at www.teaching2030.org to share your ideas and help advance the 21st century profession that every student and our nation deserves.
Okay. How many teachers in Kentucky? 40,000? 50,000. So think about 15% of 50,000, 7,500, right? Okay, good. Got the math teacher for tonight. 600,000 across the country is about 15 to 20% of all teachers. 7,500 teachers in this state in hybrid roles, teaching regularly. Maybe every day, at least a lot during the week, maybe 18, 19 hours a week, teaching the children, having credibility with their colleagues because they're still teaching, but in hybrid roles to help spread expertise, to look at the statistical data, Corey, to help make sense of it, to use it in professional ways, not in narrow-minded, bureaucratic ways. Think about if you began to prepare teachers and administrators simultaneously, which I always didn't understand. In fact, I was a professor a long time ago when I got, quite frankly, a little fed up from university and quit. But I was always stunned that in the administrative prep programs, theoretically we were supposed to go look and find good teachers to be principals, right? Okay, that sounds like a good idea, right? So why wouldn't we, when you're finding good teachers to be, or excellent teachers to be future principals, why would we prepare them in concert with the teachers to be? Because they're already good teachers. Wouldn't they be great models? But no, we can't do that. We got to have very separate sort of programs that don't blur the lines of distinction between those who teach and lead, but further balkanize those lines. Think about, at least in some pilot way, begin to prepare teachers and administrators simultaneously to build the kind of leadership force and the kind of teacher leadership that only principals who prepare that way would know how to embrace. And if you really want to get crazy and listen to this bald guy, you might want to consider, maybe I should jump on an earlier plane because this gets really crazy and political. What if you actually took the monies from your K-12 system, not all of them, senators, not all of them, and the monies from your higher ed system, your K-12 system, what if you took a slice of them and put them in one pot and use that pot to really blend pre-service teacher education with professional development and first-year mentoring, and not have these separate programs? These are just some of the ideas that I would suggest that need to be at the kind of base infrastructure for building the kind of teacher effectiveness system that I know you all aspire to. I am very hopeful that we will get to this place. And the reason is, despite some of those awful images that the media constantly drops on us about teachers, or the kind of unrealistic ones, because surely the Jaime Escalantes and the Aaron Grunwells are beautiful images, don't get me wrong. Fabulous people that we ought to admire, but you cannot build a system that can support 55 million children, which, by the way, in 17 years, there'll be 65 million, and 40% of them will not be speaking English as a first language, okay? So we cannot build a system just on a few heroes. And the reason I think we can actually make progress on this is this one final slide, and I'm not too much over, right, Chris? And that is the American people, despite these negative images, have a lot of trust and confidence in today's teachers. And we have yet to build upon the embrace of the American citizen for individual teachers. They don't quite get what it means for a collective of teachers to be embraced. And Becky is shaking again. Yeah, and from your time in the classroom and the school board chair, you can see that. But this statistic here gives me hope. And it gives me hope for the work of this group, because I know every one of you, with the diversity of ideas and the expertise that you bring, you can help mobilize teachers in ways to serve all the kids that this state and this nation deserves. Thank you very much.